These are Effect Audio's latest signature series cables. They are high-end audiophile cables made for high-end audiophile IEMs. And they come in at a fairly eye-watering $200 to $300 US depending on which of them you get. And that only makes them entry-level for Effect Audio because they are a company that sells some cables that are priced upwards of $5,000 US. I'm not kidding. And that really does raise the question, do high-end cables matter? Well, hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan, this is Super Review, and for the past couple of weeks, I've been living with these cables, been doing some listening tests, some measurement tests, and I'm ready to let you know what I think. All right, let's get into it. And just to be upfront, I'm coming into this as a bit of a cable skeptic, okay? Obviously, I listen to a lot of IEMs, and I am very used to hearing differences between them that a lot of people, normal people, would consider insignificant, that are actually pretty significant to me and audiophiles like you. But with cables, I've just never really had that experience where a cable made a significant difference in my listening impressions. Okay, there's a couple of exceptions, we'll get to those later, but really that's kind of my frame of view, is I don't really believe that cables make a big difference in terms of sound. And I was completely upfront with Effect Audio about that when they reached out to me to send these things in for review. And to their credit, they still sent them in for review. So for, again, the past couple of weeks, I've been giving these things a real honest shake, trying to figure out, do they make any difference in the sound? So let's talk about it. And I guess before we dig into the details, just a quick overview of what we've got here on the table. These are, in fact, 3 different models. They're all in the Signature series. And again, they are all priced kind of different. Over here, this is the Effect Audio, the Cadmus. This one's $250. This one is silver-plated copper lits, if you care about the metals in there. And the way that Effect Audio describes this one as it is that it enhances bass depth and provides clear, detailed sound, okay? Over here, we've got the Effect Audio Aries. This is their cheaper model. This is the $200 one. I believe this one's just copper. And the way that they describe the sound in this one is just that it has powerful sound. I don't know what that means exactly, but maybe we'll find out as I do my listening impressions. And then finally here is the Eros. This is the most expensive one on the table at $300 US. It's also a copper silver alloy. I don't know. I can't really understand the differences between all these metals, but they do have slightly different descriptions. But as far as the description of the sound, they say that this one expands the sound stage and it gives it a warm, bass-rich experience. Okay, so that's kind of what they say about this. But I'm going to dive into this in a couple of different ways. All right, let's talk about the physical form factor first, because while I might be even coming into this a skeptic of sound differences between cables, that doesn't mean that I think cables don't matter at all. I mean, obviously you can have a bad cable, but let's say you have a decent cable starting. I think just having a cable that looks nice, that feels nice, and that behaves the way you want can frankly be a reason enough for you to spend money on a cable. I've spent probably, you know, maybe like $70 is maybe the most I've personally spent on a cable, and you can obviously get cables much cheaper than $70. And the reason I spent that money was because it had a form factor and a build quality that I wanted. So do these have that? Well, let's dive into them. Let me move these boxes out of the way. And let's just talk about the build. I guess we can kind of look at all of them, but they're all built very much the same. They do also have some features, which I guess we can highlight. But generally, these are, as you would probably expect, these are some pretty nice built cables, all right? They're a little bit on the heavyweight side for sure. If you're looking for the lightest weight, easiest to wear, the cable that's going to disappear on your body the most, that is not what these cables are. And to be honest, that's not really what any high-end audiophile cables are. There's a couple of brands out there that make cables like that, but most high-end cables are going to be kind of like this. They are very much on the thick side. Like they're going for that weight and giving you that girth to make it feel like you got something that is worth your money. And these things do feel pretty nice. So they're definitely on the thick side. And behavior on them is actually also pretty stinking good. I'll give them the little roadie wrap so you can see that they are not particularly memory prone. They are a little bit on the stiff side because, again, they are fairly thick. But the behavior is generally pretty good. And I like that. I really do like the way that these things feel. Again, they're on the thick side. I'm going to pull up another cable here as an example. Right here is the Truth Ear Gate cable. This is a cable that comes free on a $20 IEM, just to kind of highlight the difference in thickness, right? Let me show you, I guess, this end, right? That's the difference between a $250 cable and a free cable on a $20 IEM. It's a lot of thickness, it's a lot of material. Does it make a difference for sound? Again, we'll find out. But does it make a difference for feel and how you feel about your stuff? It certainly can. And yeah, generally I think that these are nice feeling cables. Again, they're heavyweight, so you're gonna feel them more when you're listening to your IEMs. They're not gonna be the sort of thing that disappears. And I do also have a couple of quibbles with some of the hardware on them, although some of this is also featurey, all right? So down here we've got the connector. This is a 4.4 mil balanced version. They do come in, I think, 3.5 and maybe even some other connectors. I'm not totally certain, but I know for sure you can get it in 3.5 if you'd like. But what's notable is that they're not like a swappable termination, right? If you want to use a 3.5 version of this, you're just gonna have to buy another cable rather than buy a little termination mechanism or maybe having it packed in there. Like, frankly, a lot of lower end cables are including these days. Interestingly, I know Effect Audio does have a mechanism for swapping out terminations like this. They even have a brand for it. They call it Termex. It's just not included here on the Signature series. What they do have, however, and this is more unique, so I can understand why they went ahead and included this instead, is they have this this feature called Connex, where, and I haven't even actually played with this, so I kind of don't want to break it, but these connectors up here, they unscrew and you can swap this out to be either a 2-pin cable or an MMCX cable, and I think also an IPX cable. So depending on how you want to fit this cable, you can basically just buy one cable, assuming you're fine with 4.4 being fixed, and use it on multiple IEMs regardless of which connector they use. And I think that is actually kind of a cool feature. There is one downside to that, however, is that it just ends up making these connectors a little bit on the tall side. You know, if you've got an IEM where these things will fit recessed, I don't think it'll be a big deal. But if you've got an IEM where they don't fit recessed, and here I'll pull in an example, right? Here's my my Moondrop Dusk. I find that it just makes this connector a little bit on the tall side. It's not excessively tall, but it's borderline. It's borderline, all right? And that's just kind of a consequence of having two features, I guess. It's got the recessed, the protruded connection here, as well as just a little bit of extra height from that Connex mechanism, which again is a cool feature. The other thing that I wanted to highlight here is the Y-split and the chin cinch. I think the Y-split looks really stinking cool. It's a little bit bigger than average, but frankly not that much bigger than like some of the best Y-splits. Generally, I like a nice small compact Y-split. And it's got an integrated chin cinch, which is kind of cool the way it looks. I like the way that, you know, if you don't want to use a chin cinch, it can just kind of slide up there and almost look like you don't have one. But when you need it, you can pull this thing up, and then you have, you know, the feature of holding the cable a little bit more tighty against the bottom of your chin. I like this feature. And the cable, the chin cinch, here's what I'll say about it though. I don't really love it. A couple of reasons why. One, I do use a chin cinch. I'm a big fan of a chin cinch when it works well. And I think that this thin metal chin cinch just looks a little bit, I don't know, it looks a little bit out of place on this big beefy cable. It's also a little bit thick and has kind of sharp edges. I think maybe more to the point though, it just really doesn't stay in place that well. And this is on their thicker cable. I know that they use this mechanism or a similar mechanism on even thinner cables, where I think that this would be even less useful. So I don't know. I'm not a big fan of that mechanism. As cool as it looks, and I like the integration, and I appreciate that it's there at all, because not all cables come with a chin cinch. I do think that that is something that would be a bit of a bother for me when I was using this cable. I guess the last thing I wanted to talk about is just to highlight the material. So these two cables here, the Aries and the Cadmus, are using materials that are pretty similar to other IEM cables, right? Like you can get a cable that looks pretty similar to this aesthetic and this aesthetic. They're very nice versions of it, don't get me wrong, but they're also kind of common. This one, however, I always forget about the name of it, the Eros. This one has got a very unique material to it. It's got this matte gray finish, and it looks kind of plasticky and like it might have a bad behavior to it, but it actually might be the best behaved of the bunch. And I just frankly love, I was going to say I like the way this thing feels, but no, I love the way this cable feels. It's just, it's got a beefiness to it, a compliance to it, and that odd but satisfying matte texture to it also makes it unique. To me, that makes this cable the most stand out of the bunch. Now, maybe you would, maybe I'm just saying that because it's also the most expensive, but no, really it is just because it is the most different of the bunch. Let me check out my notes to make sure I'm not missing anything on physical form factor. I'm not. So then we're going to get into talking about what do I hear as far as differences between these different cables? And so just to give you an idea of what listening tests I was doing with this, I was actually using this IEM that was in view just a little bit ago. This is the Moondrop Dusk, the Moondrop Cross Critical Dusk, because this was specifically one of the IEMs that I asked Effect Audio. I was like, okay, again, I'm going into this as a bit of a skeptic. I want to have the best possible chance for me to hear a difference. These are the IEMs that I have. Which one do you recommend I use? And the one they recommended was, for me, the Dusk. So I hooked up one of the cables. I listened to the Dusk for a while. I reconnected to another cable. And here's maybe just to highlight a little bit some of the complications that arise when you do a listening test like this, right? There's a number of things that can be affecting your impression. So one is obviously there is a placebo effect. A lot of the times people hear things and they describe things that maybe they can't hear when they're doing it blind, right? Now, when I'm doing this test, I am not blind. I'm doing this manual. I'm doing the cable swapping and stuff myself. So I am kind of like poisoning my mind a little bit as I'm going into it because I know what I've done. And maybe that's going to influence my hearing perception. But even beyond that, there's some other challenges with a test like this. And the biggest one is honestly, it's just the time that it takes to switch cables, right? I have to take the earphones out of my ears. I have to disconnect one cable, connect the other one, replug it into my DAP. Hopefully the DAP hasn't changed its volume, plug them back into my ears and listen. And then hope that within that, I know it doesn't sound like a lot, like it's probably 15 to 20 seconds if I'm doing it really fast. That is enough time, frankly, to just completely lose memory of what I heard before. A lot of the times when I'm doing listening tests between IEMs, I like to sit them on the table right next to each other and just put one on my ear, pull it out, put the other one in my ear. And that even still takes like 5 seconds. And even there, auditory memory can be fallible. So just note that there is a little bit of a challenge there. So I've got kind of like the bias in favor of the cables and that I'm doing it sighted, but then also the bias against the cables and that I'm doing this by myself with just one pair of IEMs and got 20 seconds of downtime in between listening sessions. So what do I hear with the Effect Audio signature cables? Well, honestly, pretty fantastic sound. Just excellent sound. They do not get in the way of the sound that the IEM is making, that my music is making. And I really am proud of my music. I listen to some really good music. But that's because the music and the IEM sound really good. I also compared this with, this other cable. This is the cable I've been using on my Dusk before them, which is just, I don't know, I think I paid like $24 for this cable on AliExpress. Also listen to it versus that. And this also sounds excellent. It doesn't get in the way of my IEMs or my music. In my listening impressions, I cannot pick out any audible differences between these. Anytime that like I'm listening and like I think like maybe I noticed something that I didn't notice the last time I was listening with the previous cable, I'll swap back to that cable, kind of rewind my song back to there, be like, oh no, it's there. I just wasn't paying attention to it at that time when I listen. And I find that frankly, that's just kind of like that's just the case with most of that sort of listening difference that I've ever heard in my life with audiophile stuff, whether it's listening between cables or listening with different amplifiers, different DACs, different digital audio players, is whenever I've thought that I heard a difference and I go back and like truly test myself to see, does that difference exist? I really just have a hard time coming away with any confidence that that difference is actually there. And it's not just the difference of what my perception was at the time. Now, that said, like I mentioned up top, I didn't just rely on my ears for this listening test. In fact, I wanted to do a couple of measurements because there might be things that, I don't know, maybe my ears are broken. Maybe I've got bad auditory system versus everybody else. And this was just a good way of finding that out. So let's do some measurements. And I think there's a couple of different ways that you can measure cables to see what difference they make. Let me arrange this real quick and kind of get this situated so I can talk about impedance. All right, we're going to talk about it from the perspective of impedance. We're going to get into some measurements of the impedance of themselves, but I also just kind of wanted to start with frequency response. So to start with, Sorry, this was a little bit of a clumsy transition. This is an IEM that a lot of people are very familiar with. This is the Truth Ear Zero Red, and this is an IEM that comes with an impedance adapter in the box. That impedance adapter makes the cable have 10 ohms of impedance, okay? And I know we're talking about adding an adapter to an existing cable, and that can seem like I'm talking about something that's different than just using different cables, but really adding an impedance adapter to a cable is you're basically making it a different cable, right? This is how you're modifying a cable. You could make a cable that just has that amount of impedance built into the cable. And in fact, impedance measurements do vary by cable. We're going to get into that. But this is just a good way of highlighting what difference impedance can make on the sound. And these are measurements that I made on my measurement rig. And I guess I'll just show you how I made these measurements, right? So I've got the IEM, again here in this case, the Moondrop Critical Dusk. I've got it situated inside of my coupler. All right. And then what I did was I just swapped the cables without touching this as much as possible. Now, just note, it is impossible for me to do this without touching this because any differences, any movements I make in this can impact the measurements and make some differences that are unrelated to the cables, but my goal was to minimize that as much as possible. But again, just to kind of like highlight what kind of differences we're looking for, this is another IEM with an impedance adapter, okay? And you can see that by adding 10 ohms of impedance here to the Zero Red, you can get like an extra 3 to 4, 5 decibels of bass, and that is significant. This is a difference pretty much anyone can hear. You don't have to have golden ears. This is a night and day difference that is obvious to most people, okay? But before I guess we dig into this too much, just wanted to highlight also that like impedance can be a bit of a double-edged sword because the effect of it is not always that it gives you more bass. I think a lot of people have the impression that more impedance equals more bass, but that's not always the case, right? You can use this same 10 ohms of impedance, use that on an IEM like the Truth Ear Hexa, and instead of adding bass, it actually makes it a little bit brighter. Right, so it reduces the bass slightly. That's a slight difference. And I would say even up here, this is like maybe like a half a decibel, but it's, you know, a half a decibel, pretty wideband from 1 kilohertz above. That's a subtle difference, but this is also a difference that you can hear. It makes the Truth Ear Hexa sound noticeably brighter versus using a cable with a low impedance or just a standard like 1 ohm and less impedance, okay? And then also just one more highlight to kind of show you, this is using a 15 ohm impedance adapter, so a little bit different just because that's what I measured with, but this is the Mago CK5. This is an all balanced armature set, and you can see that by adding impedance to this, you make it darker in the top end and also like woolier, like this just makes it weird. And I'm bringing up all these examples to just kind of highlight the fact that like impedance is kind of unpredictable, right? You can add impedance to the cable, and it can change the sound of the headphone that you're listening to, but saying that this cable makes a headphone sound brighter, or this cable makes a headphone sound bassier, it's going to really come down to the cable and the headphone matching, that pairing, because that's not going to be always the case, right? You might have a cable that makes one headphone sound bassier and another headphone sound brighter, and it's going to be the exact same cable. And that's just kind of the effect of impedance. So I say all that just as kind of lead up to this. This is my measurement of the Moondrop Dusk using the 3 different cables that we've got here from Effect Audio, right? And again, just kind of highlighting, I put the names down here. The Cadmus was intended to improve clarity. The Eros is intended to improve musicality. I'll kind of interpret that as warmth. Clarity I would interpret as like brightness, and then Aries intended to improve power. I'm not sure how to exactly interpret that in terms of language I'm more familiar with, but as you can see, frequency response wise, it basically made no difference. Okay, between all 3 of these cables using the same IEM with that measurement methodology that I highlighted, which again is prone to some error because I am moving the thing a little bit, but you would expect there to be a more significant difference. In fact, let me baseline these measurements real quick so you can kind of see, okay, there is a slight bit of difference if we're looking up here. And let me exaggerate this as much as possible. So I'm going to stretch out this graph as much as possible and talk about, okay, so there's about half a decibel of difference that I measured here at around 15,000 hertz. And that is about exactly the the degree of error that you would expect from my measurement methodology, which is, again, using this coupler as I'm moving this thing around. I'm making micro modifications or micro changes to the insertion depth of this unintentionally, but that is going to impact the measurement enough to give you that much of a squiggle in the high end, but it makes no difference for the rest of the frequency response, which again is kind of exactly what I would expect if these cables were not really doing anything for the sound, at least in terms of frequency response. So I don't know. Again, as far as my listening impressions, obviously these measurements that show no difference kind of back up my listening impressions. I don't see any difference in the measurements, but that's not the only way to measure these. So I do also have one other thing that we can pull up real quick here, and that's a multimeter. All right, this is another way to, maybe a more direct and exact way to measure impedance. I was talking about the effect impedance can have, but this is maybe just kind of like another way to double check myself electrically, right? So basically you can use a tool like this to connect to a cable. Here in this example, right, I have got one end of it connected to, I believe, the positive left end, or maybe the grounded left end, the negative left end. And then on the red side, I've got it connected to the left termination, or where it enters into the IEM, right? And basically what that lets me do is measure how much impedance this cable is generating. And that's what you see over here in the number on the right, right? So this is measuring 0.2 ohms of impedance. Now, just as like a recap, when we were looking at these measurements where we show a difference, right? This is the difference that 10 ohms of impedance can make on the Truth Ear Zero. Again, very audible. 0.2 ohms is kind of like this baseline, right? And if we go from this cable to the next one, so this is the Eros, also got exactly 0.2 ohms of impedance. And then over here with the Aries, also exactly 0.2 ohms of impedance. And then again, just to kind of like, so we have a baseline, actually compared it here with this free cable that comes with my $20 IEM. And this one measures with 0.5 ohms of impedance. So between these cables and this cheapo right here, there is actually a measurable difference in terms of impedance. This has got about half an ohm of impedance. These have got half of what that has at 0.2 ohms of impedance. Very, very low impedance rating. Probably the lowest I've ever measured. And that to me is a good thing. I think a low impedance output source on your amplifier, on your DAC, on your cables, that is exactly what I want, because again, we talked about impedance and what it can do to your headphone. It's kind of unpredictable, and I don't want those unpredictable characteristics entering into the fray. So I want as low to 0 ohms as possible. And these definitely do get lower, but how much of a difference is it versus this? I'll say this, it's not measurable when I do the frequency response measurements, because again, we're talking about 0.3 ohms. 10 ohms is a measurable difference on most IEMs. 1 ohm, probably not. And 0.3 ohms is, I think, just not going to be a measurable difference. Now, here's what I will say. It is possible that 0.3 ohms on a certain IEM, like a really sensitive IEM, could actually make a significant difference. A difference that might even result in a frequency response difference, right? So I've got like a lot of stuff from, I don't have a lot of stuff, but there is a lot of stuff from Campfire Audio that is super, super sensitive. Possibly that stuff would actually have a noticeable difference by using one of these cables versus my $20 cable. But certainly here on the Dusk, I hear no difference, not to my ear. I don't know. I think that's probably going to do it for my thoughts here on the Effect Audio signature cables. What did we learn here? I mean, again, they are nice cables. They feel fantastic. Again, I really love the way that this one looks. The Eros looks beautiful, feels fantastic, and it's very unique, but it does have a couple of ergonomic issues that would probably still keep me from dailying this particular cable. It's just a little bit on the heavyweight side, which I could probably deal with, but that chin cinch is kind of annoying. I don't know. Out of 5 stars, look, they're fine cables. They work. They look beautiful. They feel nice. They're a little bit pricey, yes, and I'm not necessarily going to say that you should go out there and spend $200 or $5,000 on a cable. But if you really like the way that these things look, well, I don't know. I'm not going to tell you not to do it. But if you're looking for these cables to make a significant difference in terms of your sound. I certainly did not hear anything. I was not able to measure anything, so I personally would not recommend these for that. That said, if you're interested in checking out any of these cables, of course, I've got them linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and I'll catch you on the next super review. Cheers.
Join with the force of reviews, we now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's get into the future. Just love with this, yeah, well, up for feeling rich, need yourself, can you feel this?